Okay, so you will be notified that we are recording. When we hang up, the recording will stop, or if we want to do a few questions at the end, I'll then end the recording and we can do those privately. So as you can see, the first tab that I'm on is the notes page. So what this is a nice overview of the tabs that you'll be working your way through. We've got a little bit of breakdown as to what needs to go in here, but obviously today we will be going through this in much more detail. It's much easier to reflect back on this, and we have a cheat sheet, but the video will be available for you guys to watch and download if you need to over the summer holidays. That is not a problem. So you can see Martin's joined, so thanks very much. Martin, I'm just going to start going through the first tab, and then if you want to take over after that, and then we'll alternate.
Okay, Charlie.
Cool, fantastic. So first notes tab that you'll see is the one down here. It's the breakdown tab. We then come on to the roles and responsibilities. So it is crucial that it's not just one person in the school working on this toolkit, and it is also crucial that it's not just one person that's seen as totally responsible for GDPR. It is a whole school practice. Everybody needs to be involved. Everybody needs to know the basics. There was a lot of misconception in the beginning that GDPR was going to go away when Brexit happened. I hate to bring up Brexit, it makes it very political, but the long and short of it is it's not going anywhere. We will be continuing to abide by the rules. It's been written into UK law now. We need to understand that it is our responsibility to get on with this. So we have given you a breakdown of what key areas you need someone appointed in. So we've got, as you can see, like finance, business manager, marketing and admissions, safeguarding, IT, curriculum. You might find that you have a few people duplicated as they have several roles in the school, depending on the size and nature of it. That is fine, but we do need these people in these key areas. It's just to ensure a reflective practice of GDPR across the school. It also ensures that you have a reflective toolkit, because you in the office might not know what the teachers are using in a curriculum side of things, might not know what the business manager keeps in their office, might not know what marketing and admissions do with certain records. So it really, really helps to have a working group. We don't expect you to sit down and meet weekly. You've got to do it at your own pace. You can give them access to the toolkit, put it in a shared area, or if we host it, which we do recommend, we share it out through SharePoint for you. We can add people in to edit the toolkit. You can all work on it at the same time when it's hosted as well. So that's a little benefit given current situation. The key one that I do want to take a little bit of time to point out is the governor. We need to see a member of the governing board taking responsibility for GDPR at meetings, taking minutes. It needs to be clerked very, very clearly. It needs to be discussed at every single meeting. We need this because if there is a data breach and the ICO look to get involved and, you know, God forbid there's a fine, it is the head teacher and the governing board that are accountable. So we do need to see a member of the governing board sat in holding the title of GDPR governor. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. It's nice and easy. We need an email address, phone number, and initials so we know who we're dealing with. It also helps when you guys are busy and perhaps there's a data breach. We might give you a call and say, you know, we need to speak to so-and-so in safeguarding to discuss this. It's all designed to make this nice and even, effectively. We want everybody to feel like they are supported. We want everybody to know that they have got a strong working group. So is there any particular question that's shot up looking at this one, or are you all happy to move on? I'll just watch the chat for a second. Nope. Okay, brilliant. Any questions, again, you can email us at the end, or you can wait and hang on and have the discussion afterwards. Completely up to you. If you don't want to ask in the big group, I completely understand. I'll hand over to Martin and he will cover the next tab for you.
Thank you, Charlie. Okay, everyone, the next tab on the spreadsheet for you is the data breaches tab. In the early days, a lot of people found that they were having to record information about data breaches on individual documents. And we, with one of the earlier upgrades, moved a tab in so that you've got a place to keep a register of any data breaches or near misses that happen in your school. I often get questions when people call me about, is it a data breach or is it not a data breach? Although it's not a requirement of GDPR to record near misses, we recommend that either you pop them on the bottom of this form, or you could duplicate it and have a second tab called near misses instead of data breaches. The ICO look favourably upon schools that are really proactive in trying to identify where there might still be risk in their data processing. And if you get near misses in a particular area and a few of them appear in a year, then that should highlight to you as a school that you need to address that either through training, broadly across the whole staff, or with a group of individuals to try and close that loop. It might also be something physical, such as there wasn't a lock on a filing cabinet and people kept removing records of pupils, and actually just by putting a new lock in there, then that would solve that issue. But near misses are there to be almost diagnostic in their nature. With the data breaches tab in itself, if you have a data breach, the ICO would expect you to work through a few criteria. You'll need to identify when the breach actually occurred. It's not necessarily a given that you will become aware of the data breach absolutely at the same time it occurred. Sometimes it could be months. We've also had it even years down the line. You've realised there was a data breach and actually it was quite significant. If that happens, you need to use the data breach form here to say when you know the data breach occurred, when you were notified or you became aware, the initials of the people notified, and then the person actioning the data breach. We can clarify with you if it's high, medium or low risk. There's also up here, there's titles, and in the titles there are descriptions that will help you to do that. But if you're not sure, give us a call. That's what the help desk is there for. You need to then think of the triad that the ICA uses around what's the impact on confidentiality of the data, is the integrity of the data compromised, and what's the availability of the data? The availability, both the data that's lost, but also the availability of the original copy. Does it mean that it's not available in the school anymore for the school to operate? So does it touch upon those areas? Very often it's a yes in a couple. Sometimes it might be a yes in all three. We also consider whether there is a security or technical risk there, and that's around cybersecurity, which is also linked with the National Cybersecurity Centre. So in this example here, there might have been a cyber attack and your network's been cryptolocked. All the data on that network is not available any longer. So therefore, there's an availability issue. We need to know if that is linked to security, because there might be additional cybersecurity steps that need to be taken into consideration after we've dealt with the initial breach. Then you would look at the sensitivity of the data. Is it just personal data? Is it personal sensitive data? Is there anything in there like biometric data or fingerprint scans, which are even higher risk? We need to understand what's be delving into it. The data subjects could be pupils in the school, it could be staff that are employees, it could be parents if it's their contact details that were lost in the example of this. You'll need to describe how the breach was contained, and then you'll have to explain when the individuals that were affected were notified. So if parents have had their data breached or lost, you'll need to tell them. It's not necessarily the easiest task in the world or the most pleasant one to have a discussion about, but you do need to do it, and the ICO would expect that as a school you take responsibility for informing them that their data has been breached. You may have to report it to the ICO, and if that is the case, the help desk will work with you. There's an ICO data breach reporting form. So in addition to this, if it was a reportable data breach to the ICO, you would need to fill out one of those report forms. When you call us, we tend to try and capture as much information as possible and pre-fill that form with the information that you've given us before sending it to you. But there will always be a few extra details and questions that only you are going to know in the school. So once you've completed that, you can send it back over to us on the help desk. And if you've got DPO service with us, the DPO service means that we'll send that off to the ICO, and then we can liaise with the ICO in communications and also support you in responding to them if there's any further questions or follow-up. And we are seeing increasingly that the ICO are not just satisfied with a breach form is submitted and then the steps that have been taken are detailed. They quite frequently now add additional questions in and want supplementary information sent. And one of the key pieces they're frequently asking for now is your data breach register, but also with increasing frequency, they're asking for the whole spreadsheet that you're looking at here, because they want to look at on the IAR or the data processing contracts tab, which we'll come to in a bit, has the school assessed the processing with the assets it's got? If those assets involve a third party, what did you do to check that that third party was reputable? And if you didn't, then the ICO will level the next steps against the school as the data controller. And that's why this document is so vital. You have to prove to the ICO that you've taken GDPR seriously, you've covered the due diligence, and that you've got the evidence to prove that. And that's what this living and breathing document is. So data breaches could be electronic, like the ransomware attack. They could be paper-based, such as somebody's taken a file out of the filing cabinet, they've taken it to the classroom, and then it's been gathered up in some paper and it's been mislaid. So there's all sorts of data breaches. Some are very minor and low level, and we can deal with them quite quickly and may only affect one pupil or parent. Others can be massively far-reaching, and therefore you need to think about how the school is going to respond and if there needs to be some swift action to rectify the situation. That is the data breaches tab. Has anybody got any questions about data breaches? I'll just go over and have a look at the chat and see if anyone's put any questions in there. If anyone wants to unmute, you can also do that too. Charlie, I see you've responded to that question there. Charlie, I'm happy to go on to the SAR tab if you want to then pick up data held, as these two things link. The next tab that you have is the Subject Access Requests tab. Subject Access Requests tend to be quite a local experience. We find still, even now, there's some schools that haven't had any subject access requests. There are others that have been plagued by them and they're quite frequently having to deal with them. So it's really down to the awareness of the people that are either sending their children to the school or staff in the school, because all of those individuals as data subjects can make a subject access request. Subject access request is that the school will collect and process data that references them and it's owned by them, and the school collects it and processes it on their behalf. So they are entitled under GDPR to access the data that the school holds on them. So it could be a parent and guardian that wants their information. It might be that they want information about the child that they have at your school. It could be a member of staff that wants information that you hold because you employ them. So there's lots of different scenarios where you can receive a subject access request, but when you do, you need to keep a log of subject access requests received. So I've got a couple of examples here. So you log the date that you received them. Our spreadsheet automatically now generates the date when you need to have it returned. It's 1 calendar month. It used to be 30 days, but that changed last summer. It is now 1 calendar month. So for example, if you get it on a certain day and a month, it's due the certain day in the next month. The format that it's received in needs to be detailed. You will be expected by the ICO to verify the eligibility of the person making the subject access request and that they can get the data that they're requesting. If you've got any concerns, you are within your rights as a school to ask for identification. That could be a photo driving license, it could be a passport. You'd encourage for that individual to present them. Obviously with COVID, you may not want to have them arriving during the day when there might be other people coming and going or pupils exiting, but you should try and verify that the person is who they say they are. You will sometimes get approaches for subject access requests from legal representatives. So we quite regularly deal with solicitors and barristers or court proceedings where the legal representative presents to you a signed statement from the subject making the request, and they're acting on their behalf, and they'll present the verification evidence too. If you doubt that they are a real legal representative, you're entitled to go and check who they are. But if you start to get that situation as well and you have DPO service with us, we will support you in doing that. But it's something that's becoming increasingly frequent with subject access requests. You need to find the reason that they want the data. If it's something complicated like CCTV, you will have to not let them have access to the original video, but you need to export things like stills. And if the particular data subject appears in a crowd of other people, be it pupils and staff or pupils and parents, you need to then go through and pixelate and remove those individuals from that stills capture so that the person gets a capture of what they're talking about, maybe a particular time on a day or an area of the school, but they aren't entitled to have the entire footage because they could identify other data subjects in that footage, and then that would breach GDPR and the school would be in a breach situation. So you need to be quite careful about what you hand over. One of the other areas, and it links to redacting people out of images, that you need to redact written information. If a document about their child needs to be handed over, you need to read every document that they've requested quite carefully. If it involves a contribution from an external professional, maybe they're from the local authority, or maybe they're employed, maybe they're a speech and language therapist, if that external person or that third party organisation has made a contribution, you as a school have a responsibility to check with them whether they're happy for their information to be included in the subject access request information handed over, or whether you need to go through and redact it. And redaction is the biggest and most time consuming element of a subject access request. When you do receive the request, you need to acknowledge back to the person that they have sent it into the school and that you are dealing with it, and you will do it in one calendar month, that you will go through and you'll redact anything that shouldn't be there, and that you will hand over that information. When you hand it back to them, you should provide a list of the data being handed back, and they should sign for it ideally. So that could be physically coming in to collect paper copies. If you want to do it digitally, you need to make sure there's a read receipt and there's a form they have to sign on that read receipt that they are opening it and that they've got that information sent across to them. So you have some evidence trail that you need to get on and do that. The time spent dealing with a subject access request is something that causes the most controversy. The ICO did, in the very beginning, put out a statement of how many hours they thought were reasonable, and that those hours should be dedicated by a member of staff or members of staff in the school to deal with a subject access request. However, that subject access request is something that is proportionally going to be dealt with in school. Charlie, do you want to chip in here a minute? Because there's quite a difference in the hours it might be requested and it might be involved in the subject access request. Are you able to jump in and share your experiences?
Yeah, of course. So we have seen, as Martin's mentioned, a varying nature of how far subject access requests can go. So it can be as simple as asking for attendance, but then we've seen it go completely the other end and ask for hours and hours and days of CCTV footage. So it really does depend on what you're expecting, what you're asked for. If it's ambiguous, obviously you can go back to the parent and say, look, we need a bit more than this. Is there something in particular that you're looking for? 9 times out of 10, they're after a very particular thing. They're after an email or a referral or a behaviour note that's been observed and they've added it. It can really vary. It is in your best interest to ask the parent if there is something in particular, especially if the request comes in and it asks for everything. In that situation, you are completely within your rights to say, okay, that's going to take a lot of time. We don't have to work until we've collected everything. Help us prioritise what you're after. It's much simpler for you guys. It's much more cost and time effective. We know that some of these reports come in with a very genuine nature. They are looking to find out something very important. We've got one going on at the moment regarding SEN notes as the child is moving to a specialist school, and the local authority hasn't been overly supportive, so they've put a request in. It's all very valid. We have also seen just difficult, disgruntled parents, and we all have them. Let's not pretend that we don't. The ones that walk into the office and you think, oh my God, not today. Those type of parents put those in to gum things up. So make sure you have the conversation with each other. Make sure you have the conversation with us, and we can support you through all of these subject access requests, every single one, if you want us to. You might find that you get the hang of it in the lower sort of request level. You can deal with that yourselves. That is not a problem. But like Martin said, we are here to support you. We will guide you through it. If you need us to oversee certain email responses, we can do that. We are here to support you. We can't run them for you. We can't obviously see that data because then we generate a data breach. But we are here to support you as much as you need us to. So it is really a matter of asking us to help when you need it.
A question that's come up in the chat is what's reasonable. It's still 18 hours of administrative time per subject access request that's deemed as reasonable. So you therefore need to dedicate that amount of time before you stop. If you don't get all the data requested in that time, you need to make a judgment call as a school. Do you continue and exceed the 18 hours because you know the person is just going to put in another request or ask for an extension to the original? Or do you call it there and then hand over what you've got and see what happens next? You will know from the parent that you're dealing with or the member of staff you're dealing with which way it could potentially go. If you think that they would then request further data, we would normally advise you just to go ahead and collect as much as you can before handing it over, because it causes you a lot less of a headache in the end than having to go back to the beginning and start to do the similar things again. It's just one of those things that you just can't avoid.
Definitely.
There is also, some people have asked me in the past, well, can I start to charge for things like reprographics costs and so forth? No, you can't. Subject access requests are free under the GDPR. They used to be chargeable under the Data Protection Act 1998. They're not anymore. So it doesn't matter what you incur in the way of costs, you have to swallow it, whether it's time lost from staff or whether it's 2 reams of paper and all the photocopying. They are entitled to their data and you have to pass it to them as the data controller. Any other subject access request questions? I can't see anything in the chat, but does anybody want to unmute a mic and ask anything?
I will point out as well, we do have plenty of documentation on how to deal with these types of requests up on the portal. And I believe there is a video of me talking over a presentation, which I appreciate is not very stimulating watching, but it is really helpful, and we break down how to deal with subject access requests in that as well. So it is good to maybe share those resources with office staff that might help you compile the results.
Any final questions on subject access requests until we move on to the next section?
One's just come in.
That's a very good question. Charlie, do you want that one?
Yeah, so unfortunately, if the school is closed over the summer, the ICO, and this is really not us, we are very understanding of school situations. All of us have an educational background. If the school is closed, the ICO expects somebody to be checking emails and I mean, things like if your post is held, that's a different story. If post is held over the summer or over the Easter holidays, the subject access request comes in a letter form. You then deal with it from when you open that letter, because you haven't actually had the letter arrive on site. If it comes in via an email, you are expected to deal with it over the summer holidays. And we appreciate that staff aren't contracted to be in potentially, but the ICO is very adamant that it is dealt with. This is something that we are constantly in discussion about as a company, and with the ICO, they are aware that we feel that obviously it's a little bit contradictory. But at the moment, unfortunately, if it comes over the summer holidays, it is going to have to be dealt with. We do suggest in your out of hours or your sort of bounce back email, you could put a little something saying the office isn't manned, staff aren't contracted, but in theory, the ICO does expect to see people checking. It is one of those little flaws in GDPR that doesn't work for a school. It works for companies that don't close down over the summer, but for schools, academies, and, you know, unfortunately, we are sucked into that and we are expected to deal with them over periods of closure.
You may get some parents who deliberately put in that subject access request on the last day of term. We had a couple last summer where admin teams and head teachers worked nearly 6 weeks solid through the whole summer for some very complicated subject access requests. I fully appreciate that you may not be contracted to work and you also are entitled to a holiday, particularly after everything that's gone on. But if you don't respond to that subject access request and you don't process it, the person making the request can make a complaint to the ICO, and the repercussions can be far worse from ignoring it or not handling it than actually biting the bullet and getting on and dealing with it. We do understand, as Charlie said, the way that schools work. We have got an education background. We're all from there. At the moment, that hasn't been amended for schools to take account of the fact that they aren't necessarily open during holiday periods, particularly the summer holidays. But the ICO have held fast on that, and they do expect schools to deal with them.
There's just one more question in the inbox, Martin, on the chat, if you want to address that, and then I'll take over for the next tab.
So just emails or post too. If post is delivered, as in you don't have your post held at the sorting office, and it's delivered to school, then you'll be expected to deal with it. If it's held at the sorting office, this is one that's out for discussion. As Charlie said, you can plead to the ICO that you don't have a postal delivery over the summer because there's no one there to receive it, or you don't have a mailbox for it to be put into, and that the big bag is delivered in the first week back or the week just before you return to school, and then it's sifted. But the ICO, the couple of responses I've seen around that, the ICO have said that the school needs to reevaluate how they handle posts over the summer period and have somebody check periodically what's in that mailbag, not leave it for 6 weeks before it's dealt with. So you could be on more dangerous ground by not dealing with it than trying to deal with it and think about, well, do we still hold our post, or is there someone that could just have a look 3 weeks in and then you look with another 3 weeks at the end of the holidays?
And a similar response to Louisa's question as well. Louise has asked, if they don't open the email, can they not deal with it? You could try and argue that with the ICO, that obviously you've not checked the emails until that first week back, or even the week before students are back in. But really, the ICO wouldn't look overly favourably on not addressing an email in the inbox, especially if it's got subject access request or SAR in the title. They'd expect that if you were checking other emails and you saw that in there, that you would react to it as appropriate because it has officially been sent in. Martin, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, or...
There are a couple of schools publicly available as previous cases on the ICO website where just that has happened, and the ICO have gone against the school on that judgment. So if you've got an email address where people are supposed to contact you for information about GDPR or subject access requests, as Charlie said at the beginning, somebody needs to monitor that, and it won't work with them to say that I didn't see it and it wasn't open, so therefore we couldn't deal with it. That won't stand you in any good stead with them whatsoever. I appreciate this may mean a re-evaluation in school of staffing over the summer, or who's going to check a particular mailbox, but it does need to be one of the considerations, and it's certainly one of the things that we often talk about coming in doing Dpia audits or GDPR health checks or readiness. It's just one of those things that need to be adjusted in the practice of the school so that the data processing is accounted for during holiday periods. And it might be you just check once in the middle, but there needs to be something. It can't be this big block of time. So Easter and summer holidays are the worst by far. Half terms aren't quite so bad. Any other questions around that? Okay. If we pop on to the next tab, if I do data held, Charlie, can you do IAR and I'll pick up the next one?
Yep, absolutely.
So up until now, we've been looking at processes and mechanisms in the school for ensuring GDPR compliance. The next three tabs that we're going to look at reference data mapping. So data mapping is a core requirement of GDPR compliance. Data mapping means that as a data controller, you understand the data that's collected, and then you also understand with absolute clarity how that data is processed and any risks associated with that, and then how you are going to put mitigation processes in place to reduce those risks. So the data held tab is the first of the data mapping tabs. So if you think of this as step one is data held, step two is data processing, step three is also data processing. But if you're thinking of it as a flowchart, data held is the data collected by the school as a data controller. The information asset register will be assets used by the school to process the data collected that's listed over in the data held tab. If the asset represents an external organization, then they also need to be assessed as a data processor externally, and that's why they appear over here in the data processing contracts tab. And then the responsibility upon the data controller is to contact them and establish what they do with data sent from the school and how they handle it and how they process it, so the school can be assured that the processing is compliant with GDPR. So data held is collection, information asset register is processing, maybe internal and it may be external. Where it's external, you need to have all those organizations appear in the data processing contracts tab, and you need to contact every one of those individually and get assurance of what they're doing with the school data. It is the most time consuming and complicated part of the process, but data mapping is absolutely crucial. And as I said, this is now part of the evidence that the ICO are requesting. So we've had a couple of schools where we've had very serious crypto locking cases, and we've had entire loss of data. And the first thing the ICO has said, well, where is your asset register and where's your data processing checks that you've undertaken with the external IT companies involved? And it hasn't been available in one of those cases, and the ICO have come down very hard upon one of those schools because they didn't take the responsibility to check the third-party organisations they were involved with. It's yet to be seen whether that's going to be just reputational damage or whether that's going to be a fine, but you have to get this done, however painful it is. The data held should list the different data subjects in school. These data subject groups are from the ICO. They are not conceived by us. So pupils are one group of data subjects. Contacts would be parental contacts or legal guardians. Then you've also got staff. That's anyone with a contract of employment in the school. Agents would be external, outside, third-party organisations. Agents are a term used by the ICO. You can expand this, so you could have other data subject groups if you wish. So I've seen a lot of schools include columns such as governors and things like that. You don't have to, but you can if you want. You then have to list the different data fields that you collect either by paper means or electronic means. You don't need to list the systems here. You don't need to list the documents. You want the individual fields of data that you bring in regarding that data subject. And then you have to clarify whether it's personal, which is P here, S, sensitive, or it has safeguarding links, or there might be an X there where it's got financial implications and it could be used for identity theft and fraud. The table over there, the key is over on the right hand side. We've pre-populated in most cases, depending on the service you purchase from us, what those are, but you should also then always amend them because there might be additional data fields you collect as a school that aren't included in this list, so you need to add them on. That's what that red text is indicating there. There may be some of these data fields that aren't relevant for you at all, so therefore you need to delete them and remove them. So it's a check for you as a school, as a data controller. What are you collecting? What's the data you bring into the school regarding the different data subject groups, and the ICO will expect you to know that without hesitation. So that's why the data held tab is there. Any questions on the data held tab? Nope. Okay, I'm getting a lot of shaking heads. No, oh, I've got one there now. Contracts are any third-party organisation. Contacts are people that you contact external to the school that you have some sort of relationship with. The contacts could be everyone from the plumber that comes to fix the drains or something in the school, right the way through to a software company that provides a crucial platform. If it is the plumber, you're not really going to be giving the plumber any personal or sensitive information, so they don't need to appear on the third tab we're going to look at, data processing contracts. But if it was that crucial bit of software that holds nearly all the personal and sensitive information about pupils, then they do need to appear as the organisation, but you need to list what fields you bring in. So you're going to hold things like the name and the contact number for most organisations you work with. Because you hold that data on those organisations, you list it in the data held, but it doesn't need to necessarily always appear over in the data processing. But we'll come back to that in a minute. So the next tab we're going to move on to, as I've spoken for quite a while, and Charlie will talk about, is the information asset register. And I'll stop sharing my screen. Charlie, you can take over from here, and then I'll pick up again with third-party data processors.
Lovely, thank you, Martin. Okay, so over to the IAR, which is the one I think probably most of you are here for. It is the biggest piece of work that you have to do on this toolkit. It's the biggest bit of data input for sure. We'll start from the top. So we have filled this with pre-populated examples. If you want to see some examples, then please let us know and we can send a few out. But given this is a resource and an educational tool, we won't be actually sharing the template at all. We can provide you with certain aspects of it though for reference. So as you can see, we have listed the assets that the school holds. So using the data held tab, we've listed what information we collect. We then need to know where that information is held and what asset that's held in. So we have your Sims database as an example. You guys might use Arbor or any other system, but we've used Sims as an example. We've got pupil files, and we've got the admissions for the main school. So we also go into, what do we hold it for? What lawful reason do we have to have that data on site? So it doesn't have to be that technical. You don't have to quote the government legislation or the regulations as to why. We have for examples. But if you guys just put can't have child on site without certain information, we just need to know that you're aware of why you're holding this data, and it's the sort of justifiable reason. So if somebody says, well, why do you need this on me? You can say comfortably, because we need it for GDPR, we need it to make sure that your child has a contact, has the correct medical information. You do have a justifiable reason for collecting all the data that you do. We're not saying that, if you're not sure of the data, you shouldn't hold it. If you're not sure, have the conversation with people in the office, have the conversation with the head teachers and break it down, have that conversation. Because if you don't need the data, if you think back to a few years ago when the DFE told everyone we needed to know everybody's EAL, place of birth, even how they commute into school. As things have changed, you no longer need that data. So this is a really good exercise as well. If you think, well, actually, why do we have a list of who rides their bike to school when you don't need it? Get rid of that data. So your lawful reason, just put why you hold that data. Under location, that is just where is that data kept. So you can see Sims server kept in a lockable room if you keep it on site, or if it's hosted, just put where it's kept in there. We've also got things like the admin office in a drawer or a cabinet. We've got things like the admin network on a shelf in the admin office. Just be nice and high level. Where do you keep it? Because later on you'll see we ask all sorts of questions around security as well. The next one is the owner. So who looks after this asset? Who is in charge of keeping it up to date? Who protects it, who holds on to it, whose office is it kept in, who oversees the use of it. If you click these blue bordered items at the top here, you'll see there is a little help box as well, which breaks down what we're talking about. It just gives you a nice short reminder as to why we're asking this information. So as you can see, we've got examples in here of school administrator. If we go further down, you've got admin office, class teachers for things like behaviour management. Achievement management is often held by the class teacher. Off-site risk, if you have a trip coordinator or the head teacher oversees it. Whoever owns it, whoever looks after it, whoever organises it, pop it in the owner section. Under volume, it is just asking how many assets are there and how many students are in that asset. So if it's a class register, you might say that there is one register per class and you have 30 members listed on the asset. Same for off-site. If you ask how many assets are held, so that's one per trip, how many students went on the trip. We don't expect you to go in and list every time your intake changes. So maybe you have 2 drop out in the same month. We don't expect you to go in and change your assets. So ballpark it for us, put up to 500. That is fine. As a firm figure, if you want to update it yearly, that is absolutely fine. So you might have 174 and the next year you might have 176. That is fine, but it does add to the workload. So just think about how practical you're going to be with this, because as Martin's mentioned, this is a living document. It will continue. Even when we've signed it off, we do expect you to continue updating it as and when. It won't be the conscious effort that you've made recently to sit down and input data over an hour or 2 hours. It will be, okay, we no longer use MyMaths, we use SumDog. So you make that change and record it on the toolkit. So it is like a health and safety log moving forward, but it's a health and safety log for data. So the next section, we've got personal data. This is asking you what information from that data held tab are you keeping in this particular asset. So if I find one that's relatively interesting, so if we go with pupil file, you've got contains sensitive and statutory data on children, parents and carers. So you can keep it nice and highbrow. You can keep it sort of we know what's in a pupil file, but you can go down and break it even further down and put down here we've got forename, surname, letters containing personal information. By all means, break it down. Tell us exactly what you keep in that asset, because for every school, it does vary. What's in your class register might be entirely different in one school to the next. So this one, our pretend school, we've got forename, surname, and potentially letters. But on your class register, you might just have the forename if you're a small school or you know the class and the teacher's moved up with them, whatever reason. Do just let us know what you keep in the asset. If you think, well, actually, it's got everything in there, again, try and break it down a little bit for us. But, we, with an educational background, we all roughly know what's kept where, what do you keep in each asset. But for the sake of an audit, we do like to see it broken down. As with the ICO, if they ever ask to see your toolkits, again, I mentioned that the ICO and Ofsted are looking a bit more interested in all of this now, which is why we're running this sort of final push to get you guys ready, because we do know imminently that there are some changes on the horizon. We don't know when, unfortunately. Everybody's a little bit cagey about that. But we do know that the governing bodies of education are becoming more and more interested in your asset registers. So the clearer it is, the more precise it is, the happier they're going to be.
Charlie, just to add into that, I spoke to a head recently who had a Section 5 Ofsted, and the inspector there didn't pursue it too seriously, but did ask about safeguarding in context of GDPR safety of data. So the questions are already beginning.
Brilliant. There you go. Yeah, so it is very real now. I think I know I mentioned in the beginning that a lot of this was, well, maybe, after Brexit, we won't need to worry, or maybe it'll calm down. But Martin's just said, we have evidence of one of our consultants coming across it very, very recently. It is very important. We appreciate it takes time. We appreciate it takes a member of staff to dedicate themselves to it for 2-3 hours. But really, in the long run, having this asset register sorted is going to look much more favourably than being unable to answer questions from a governing body or from Ofsted or from the ICO or from us when we do your Dpia audit. Okay, so the next one is processing purposes. So this is why you use the data. So not why do you have it, but what do you use the data for? So the one I'm highlighting at the moment is the late pupils. And the reason we process that data is because we need to ensure pupil attendance and child protection. If we go down a little bit further, you can see we've got a record for documenting all information relating to pupils, information passed on to the next school. You've got things like contact information, medical information. All of this stuff is a legitimate reason for processing the data you've collected, for using that data that you hold as a school. We just, again, need to see that you understand why you hold that data. And again, this conversation might bring up, well, why do we collect it? And if you're not sure, have the conversation with us as well. We might be able to point you in the right direction. But if we don't know why you've got it, have the conversation amongst yourselves in the school of, do we actually need to hold on to this asset? Okay, we are nearly there, I promise. It is going to get closer to the end of this tab. It is a big one. It is the biggest, so just bear with me. So personal data source, this section is asking you, where does this data originally come from? So who gives you this data when you start collecting it? So if we go to the top, and we use our SIMS database, you'll find that actually the people that give you this information, predominantly it's the parents and carers when they sign up with those nice intake forms that you guys give out. But you also get information from the pupils themselves. You get it from the local authority, the Department for Education. You might get some from other schools if they're a transfer, or depending on the year that they're in, they might have moved into your school from an infant school into a juniors. So it's all legitimate sources of originating the data, but we just need you to tell us where that data initially comes from. So some information might come from your online services. So in class registers, the information is pulled via SIMS. That is fine. That is an absolutely valid option to put in there if it's an asset gathering information and data from another asset. But as we go further down, you might find, so in behaviour management and support, we've got people like external agencies. So that could be like a therapist or a counsellor or a speech and language therapist. So they're feeding into the portfolio that you hold on that child. That, again, completely legitimate. You need this information. You need to be able to process it. We just need to know where it comes from. So the next one along is the format. This one is really nice and easy. I won't dwell on it too much. We need to know whether it's paper or electronic. As we go across, you can see We've got like the SQL database, paper forms. We've got things like emails, sign-in books. However you store that asset, wherever the data comes from in whatever original form, just let us know. Under update frequency, we need to know how often this asset gets updated. So again, quite a nice self-explanatory one. Obviously, things like SIMs get updated daily. That is absolutely fine. It might be more than once daily, but just tell us we change this daily. So if you use it for your registers, or if somebody comes in and as they do day to day, they say, oh, so-and-so's now got to take an inhaler to school, you update it on the daily. So just pop that in there. Certain information you might update less frequently, so daily in some instances, termly or weekly. Just give us a nice overview of how often this asset is being amended, because it's a nice demonstration of how up to date and correct you keep your data. One of the big principles of GDPR is the accuracy of data. So if an asset is out of date, we need to know that you are consistently checking it. Even if it is like the free school meal list on here, termly, we still need to know that you're dedicating time to keeping it up to date and accurate and reflective. Okay, so then we're on to access, which is who in the school internally has access to this particular asset. So if we have a look at the off-site risk assessments, the head teacher, teachers, school administrator, trip organisers, they're the ones that can access this asset. They're the ones that are allowed to have a little look through and just check everything's correct. We've also got things like school club registers, where the admin staff, the staff member running the club, they're all allowed to access this information. They're all allowed to input data if they need to. They need to check it, update it. They're the members of staff that are handling that information, which links really, really nicely onto security. So with this asset, bear in mind several members of staff may be handling it. How do you keep it secure? How do you make sure that it's not just left on a desk at the end of the day? Where do you keep it? So if we have a look at personal educational plans. So this one here, we suggested that in our imaginary school, we sign into a network or a cloud platform, and we each have a unique username and password. For certain like physical assets, let me see if I can find one. Yep, so signed paper copies are kept in a locked filing cabinet for our training logs at our imaginary school. So if it's a physical asset, do you keep it in a locked office? Do you keep it in a locked drawer? Or is it just kept in an in tray? Where is it kept? Is it moved overnight? Is it locked away overnight? And again, if it's an online asset, who has access to it through a unique username and password, we would hope. We'd like to see it kept on a secure network or a hard drive if you're using those. If it's kept in a cloud platform, just tell us where you're storing this information. Because when we come to write your asset register risk review, we need to know that you are protecting your data adequately, because that, for certain sensitive assets, will be what changes it between a red, an amber, or a green. We need to know that your personal educational plans are not just left on your staff desks overnight, that they are kept in a locked cabinet. And it could even be that if they are kept out overnight, your action plan moving forward would dictate that maybe let's look at getting lockable drawers for all staff or something like that. So it all forms part of your bigger asset and risk assessment. Okay, last few as I promised. So shared recipients, we want to know who externally gets this information as well as internally. So we can see that who has access internally to this asset, but we also need to know if you send this asset externally, who gets to see it. So we've got the personal educational plan, we'll stick with this one. We can see that the head teacher, SLT and SENCO and potentially the parents get it, but external agencies as well, like if they are going to see a play therapist or a speech and language therapist, they might need to see these educational plans. They might help feed into it. They might say, well, actually, we're sort of trying this different approach. Absolutely fine for these people to see it. We just need to know that you are fully aware of who you're sending this information to. A lot of the time, this is where we see the data breaches happening. So in your toolkit, we need evidence that you understand that you don't just send it to everybody. If you're sending it to the local authority, do you send it to a specific department? Who has access externally? who can, at the local authority, who do you send it to? Do you send it to the NHS? Do you send it to the play therapist? Do you send it to parents? It just shows us that you can track this data. So if it goes missing, we can work out where potentially it slipped through the net. Okay, retention. So I think some of you were actually on the meeting that we held, the webinar we held on Monday, where we went through retention in a lot of detail. That will be put up on the YouTube channel when we have the capacity. Obviously, given the situation, we have some staff that are shielding still, so we will look to upload it. We are currently aware that it needs to go up. We are just waiting for the right time to do it for you, so that will be available. But in terms of the toolkit, we have spent, and by we, I use the royal we, it was all Martin. Martin spent last summer going through the IRMS record, writing down the differences between what version 5 and version 6 said for data retention. It is crucial that you guys as schools, academies, trusts, that you keep on top of the IRMS, that you use the latest versions. So currently we're on version 6, but they change it around this time of year, and will probably be August time, will be on version 7. So keep your eye out for that. It did used to be a free asset through unfortunate circumstances, as we believe. We think it, it used to be free. It should have stayed free. But the IRMS is now a subscription-based asset. So despite the fact we all need to use it, they are being a bit cheeky and charging for it. They've got a lot of other agencies that are feeding into it and updating it yearly. So there is a lot more work that goes into it. If you go on through the link that we've got at the top of this, it will take you to the website that you need to sign up and pay your subscription. It's £90 a year. If you want the downloadable copy, you can view it online for free in a little pop-up window, but we know a lot of schools do like to print them. So keep that in mind, that there is going to be, unfortunately, an extra cost on top of data retention. We are now going to have to subscribe for £90. We would have loved to have shared it with you guys, but because it's copywritten, obviously we would be breaking the law, which is not ideal. We have included all of these changes in a newsletter previously, and I imagine we'll probably be doing the same again this year for the big changes. We can only provide you with so much. You guys do need to access it yourselves. The retention document tells you how long you need to hold on to certain information. So if we look at the Capita Sims database, we've got in version 5, which is now outdated, but then version 6 updated primary and secondary school information. So it is crucial that you keep up to date with your IRMS. You can also see it tells you that certain information needs to be kept until the child is 25 or date of birth plus 25 years. It's really, really useful. And it also means that if you are going through a big clear out, the IRMS means that you can throw a lot of stuff out. I know that schools like to keep hold of everything. We've been in schools that are 150 years old and they've still got the original registers. So a lot of stuff we hold on to sentimental reasons, but if you can get rid of it, and really we should be getting rid of old data, have a look at the IRMS and then tell us what you do with this data when you need to get rid of it. Which links on to how is material destroyed. Again, nice and self-explanatory. It tells you whether it's shredded, whether it's deleted electronically, whether you have someone come on site to collect it. Just break it down for us, make it nice and abundantly clear exactly how you get rid of this data. We, right in the beginning, did have a school that they had a skip out in the playground. They were having some maintenance work done on the roof. At the end of the year, they had members of staff come in, and members of staff were just throwing old data into the skip. It was a particularly windy day, and I believe some of the sheets managed to escape and were blown down the road and returned by a member of the public. That is a data breach. So please think about how you're getting rid of it. Don't just throw it in a bin. Don't just throw it in a skip. If it has personal or sensitive data on, please do shred it if it's paper. And if it's electronic, delete it and then remove it from your deleted items. In emails, if you delete an email, it sits in your deleted items. If it's particularly sensitive, please do make sure to go in and then delete it properly. Obviously, email is a little bit different because you will all have an admin network that looks after your email system as well. But just think about how much data you're storing in it. Martin, I don't know if you want to pop in about email there quickly about deletion, or are you quite happy for me to crack on?
Quite, but the only thing I would add to that is if you want to, you can change the retention times in your email system, whether it's Office 365 or Gmail, so you can have what's called email retention rules. It's more problematic and complicated in Gmail than it is in Office 365. It's pretty straightforward there. So you can have it so there's a rule that everything will auto delete if it's sat in the inbox. You would need to have very clear discussions with staff that the expectation from the ICO is that email is not file storage. If there's something important, it should be either exported as a PDF and then stored in, for instance, the people record on SIMS if you need evidence of an email, or if there's an attached document, it should get filed in the appropriate place on the server. That shouldn't be kept in your email inbox or folders in your email system. So that's something just to bear in mind.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so last little section, and then we will move on to the data processing contracts tab. The privacy statement in place. So a lot of the times what you're processing data for is actually mentioned in your data protection policy or your privacy notice. So the statement we've got here is currently embodied within data protection policy. That is absolutely fine to put in there. If you're not sure, and you're not sure that the data that you hold, if it is in your privacy policy or it's within the sort of wider policies within the school, leave a little comment in there just so we know that you have a rough idea. We will then, when we come to write your audit, have a look at those policies. We will have a look and see whether the data you're collecting has got a privacy statement, whether it's necessary or not, because a lot of the information you hold is statutory, so do remember that. Risk profile on the end here isn't too much to worry about. So this is our Readiness toolkit that we've built. We haven't done a master toolkit for health check yet. We're still working on that one because it runs a little bit differently. But for Readiness, this all pulls in when we do your specific risks and your RAG review. So don't worry about the risk profile too much. That's for us to judge when we come to write your audit. That's it on going through these bits one by one. Does anyone have any questions specific to the IAR? I'll hold on for a little bit and check the chat.
I'm just responding to Rebecca. So the IRMS is a independent body. We have been, as Charlie said, we've been updating it. So up until now, I've been going through and I've been summarising from the massive set of tables in there against each specific asset where the retention time is. And you can see on our example, you can see version 5, the old version, and version 6, the current version. We've been doing that at the point we are maintaining for the Readiness and health check customers. When we sign you off on the 31st of August, that will become your responsibility to check the RMS and make sure that's updated.
It is also worth mentioning that when we send out emails asking if you'd like to upgrade your toolkit, if you would like this upgrade, that's why we've asked you whether you wanted to or not. So if we don't hear back, you won't be getting the assets. Martin did include the updated notes of the version 6 in a newsletter. Basically, when we send you guys a newsletter, when we include updates, that's where big chunks like this come through. It was a massive newsletter because of the changes that version 6 had made. So you will be getting certain information, but like Martin says, once you're signed off, the ICO would expect you to keep on top of your own data retention, because really it's something you guys should have been doing without us anyway, but it's been added into the service whilst we're working on the toolkits. But obviously 2.5 years down the line, the ICO needs to see you guys being a little bit more independent. So that's where you need to start looking at purchasing your own IRMS. We will continue to update you and let you know if there are any changes, of course, especially for schools that we are or DPO. Obviously, that's not the case for everybody. But in our newsletters, that is where you will notice the biggest changes, which is why we really push that you guys have a little read. If you aren't receiving them or they're going to an office address and you want them to go to your personal, please drop us an email to the help desk and we will rearrange that for you. That's not a problem.
So on that then, I can see that, Arlene, you've raised that the LGFL don't allow the emails through. We partner with LGFL, so that won't be a problem. If you contact them, there's a pre-filter pool where emails go into, and you can log on to an online portal that LGFL hold, and they don't even hit your spam folder if they're flagged in certain ways. So if you contact them and ask them to apply a rule to let it through, they should be able to do that for you. So then they'll come to you. As Charlie said, if that's an ongoing issue, then if you give give us a different email address, we can make sure that the newsletter comes over to alternative email address for you, so you get those. Rebecca, the link for signing up for the RMS should be in this chat further up, so it takes you to the Toolkit page, and at the top of that website page there's a member sign up section. Rebecca, you've asked another question at the bottom. Big issues with signing on to turn it on since they have a new PC. Yes, we are aware of that, and we've raised that with our development team that that you've got an issue with logging into the portal. So we sent some things over independently, but we will make sure that we continue to do that until we know that your login is fixed and working. That's rest assured that is on our radar, and that came to me, so I've escalated it. Linda, you asked about Google Drive as well as Gmail. You can have rules. You can have all sorts of rules. So in G Suite, there's something called Google Vault. You can apply rules in Google Vault for data retention. So you can have it that certain information might be deleted out of a Google Drive. So you could have a rule that every 12 months, when the academic year ticks over on the end of August, 1st of September, that all Google Drives are purged. That wouldn't normally be a popular option in schools, because it means that staff end up having to take a backup copy of their content of Google Drive and then re-uploading it for the new academic year. You need to advise staff in ICT policies or codes of conduct about maintaining documents and retention times of information and data they might be privy to, and if they'll be expected to follow the retention times set out by the school, which is why we said at the beginning the roles and responsibilities are so key here, because you need to reach everybody in school. It's everyone's responsibility to ensure that this is followed, and everyone would need to know that if they access a particular type of information, what the retention time is, and should they even be keeping it in their personal area beyond the current academic year or for the purpose that they're using it for, whether it's an intervention for a pupil. Should it then go back into something like an MIS system, or should it go back into a shared area and it's retained on there, where it's more easy to manage because there's probably an overview of shared areas and the data contained within them. Any other questions? So Ellen, what do you sign up as? Sorry, the answer is already. So you sign up for the £90 subscription. That gives you access as a school. Recently, the RMS launched a toolkit for trusts and academies. So you can take the school version or you can take the academy version. So if you know you've academized and you're there, then you might be better to sign up for the academy version rather than the school's version. But both are options there. So the £90 option is the one you need. Any other questions? Anybody need to unmute or pop anything in the chat? Okay. Right, I will take control of the screen for the next tab. And again, it's one of the bigger tabs, but it's quite important that we cover those. So we're on the final stage. This is stage 3 of data mapping. So in the IAR, if we took an example up here at the top, you might have a asset that you use for data processing, whatever your MIS system is, whether it's RM Integris, whether it's Capita Sims, there's lots of other products out there. That's an example of a third-party organization where school data is sent to them, and the school depends upon that platform for processing and storing data, but they have to use a third-party organization. That's slightly different to down here where it might be pupil files. And pupil files are stored in school. They'd be handled by an employee of the school and the admin team or the office team, and that's a paper-based document, and it's put in a filing cabinet, and there's no third party involved. So where there's no third party involved and it's school processing only, those assets stay on the information asset register. Where there is a third party involved, you need to move them across to the next tab we're going to look at, which is the data processing contracts. The data processing contracts means that you need to then contact the third party that has access or it has data transferred to them and understand what they're doing with the school's data. So some of the information will come across and look fairly similar to the IAR, but the IAR is really processing in school how you access that external platform, what the member of the school does with it. The data processing contracts is what that organization does with it when it's outside of school. So you need to, going across the columns, give the name of the processor and the system name. Sometimes they are one and the same thing, so you just replicate the name across both columns. You then explain the data that's passed across. It could be a whole database, it could be sections of a database. That might vary quite frequently. So give the ICO the best estimation of what you would give to them on a regular basis, but try to be all encompassing. Don't underestimate what's passed across. Does it contain personal data? Almost certainly it will, but the ICO wants to know that you've assessed whether personal data is in there. You have to give a reason for us as a school. What's your lawful basis for processing out of the 6 reasons, and why do you need to share that data across to this external organisation? Why couldn't you just deal with it internally? And very often it's because there's a specialist service or a piece of knowledge or a piece of software you need to access, and it just goes over into this box here. So you've got to demonstrate to the ICO the reason why you think it's okay to pass the data over. You will then go through a process where you have what's called a data processing agreement form. It's a template we've got as well. We've supplied it to all schools quite a few times. It's also available on the portal. I appreciate some of you can't get to the portal, but most people can. You download the template, and it's a Word document template. It can be split into 2 halves. I'll just quickly open it up for you and show you. Just going to change my sharing so you can see that. This is what the template looks like. It's updated by Turn It On annually. There's not been any massive changes to it. You would get the original and remove the first 2 pages because they're just for your consumption, and then we guide you to create 2 documents out of the one that you've got supplied. So when you send the data processing agreement form to the third-party organisations, you will often get asked, well, why do I have to do this? What's the reason why I have to explain all of this? And we've completed all of the legal reasons around articles and recitals in GDPR as to why they have to comply with giving you the answers. The ICO were insistent as of July 2018 that they needed to provide you with an individual one-to-one countersigned answer of what happens with your data when they get hold of it. Up until then, at the beginning of GDPR, they said it was okay to get generic information off of their websites. They then subsequently realized that that was causing a lot of problems and companies were not being above board with what they were doing. So then they changed it so that you had to have individual data processing agreements. That means the school as a data controller needs to email, and email's probably best because you can just have evidence that you've sent that communication, whereas if you post a letter, it's hard to get the evidence that the letter went. You send them that guidance, so the purple text is the guidance document. The second document then gets created from page 10 of the original document, and it's a table for them to fill in because you're engaged in a service with them. They need to tell you what they're doing with your data. You fill in this first table as the data controller, which is just the school address details and us as DPO on your behalf if you have DPO service from us. If you don't, it's your DPO that you contract out to, or you may use somebody in school. They then fill in who they are as a processor. They have to say the duration of their contract, the nature of the processing that they undertake on behalf of the school. They have to describe what that processing activity involves. They then have to list the categories of personal and sensitive data that they have access to. They then also have to describe how that data is retained, deleted, and if they give access to any third-party sub-processors. And then they have to describe their compliance with all the different acts and articles under GDPR. And then finally, at the bottom, they have to sign off as a processor and you countersign as a controller. Some organisations will send you their own version of this. If they do, that's absolutely fine. If it answers the same areas, you can countersign that. If you've got questions over that and you've got DPO service with us, you can ask us, look, is this something I can sign or should I be unduly concerned? And you keep that on record. So there's one of these data processing agreements for every third-party organisation that you engage with, because you need to assess, is there anything they're doing that's particularly risky? In other words, is there data storage on a server in, let's say, East Asia, where it doesn't adhere to GDPR compliance? Do I need to be worried that I've got school data about pupils, staff and parents over there, and what are they doing with it? Who might have access? There's different data laws or government rules and regulations that might mean other people have access that you don't want to have access, so that needs to be assessed. And then that all happens, if I reshare my screen, back over in that spreadsheet. So when you get those back, you need to summarize the returns back into the spreadsheet. So for Capita Sims, they'll refuse to sign one of those DPAs and they'll send you their own. You then get it back and it tells you what the upload method is if you didn't know. In other words, is it over the internet? Do you post something off if they constantly have direct access on the system to suck data out? Most companies don't have direct access. That means they can come in and out as they wish without asking your permission. Then you have to give an estimation of the frequency that data is sent across to that third party. You have to describe where it's stored. So for Capita, it's stored on their servers in Milton Keynes most frequently. You have to describe how long they keep it for. Well, it's 30 days in most cases for Capita data. If you also have MIS support from us, we might end up caching some over at Princess Risborough. Are they GDPR compliant from that Dpia you've received back? Yes. And then you have to put in the contact details of their DPO if they have one. If they're less than 250 employees, they don't legally have to have a DPO. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're not compliant. It just means they haven't got a DPO to contact. You then log over here, the date you sent the DPA, the date you received the DPA back, and you make any progress notes. It might be I didn't get an email back, I phoned them, I still didn't get any joy. You note it in here because we would see it when we come to do any risk assessment, but also the ICO would see that as a log of evidence that you've tried to seek clarification as to what's being done with the third party organisation and the school data. When we have had common answers in the upgrades that we've offered, we have pre-filled them in. So where we know there's common responses coming back in those DPAs and they're not school specific, we have pre-written it and they've been available in the free upgrades that you've had offered to you, which is why we've encouraged you to take the free upgrades. It doesn't mean you can get away with not having a signed DPA. You still need to send that DPA form and you still need to get it back, and then also double check that there isn't anything different in the answers you've been given from the person that you've received the response back from. So Arbor's an example there where I have seen one little slight difference in one school. So broadly speaking, it's been the same response in all schools. Those companies we've categorized by DFE data category. So we've called it core MIS systems, and in there will be all the MIS system databases. You've then got communication tools, so that's things like teachers to parents or parent mail, or if you use InTouch from Sims. Payment systems, which might be Parent Pay or Takasi, School's Cash Office. So all of those we might have financial details. You then got catering management. If you've got a catering company subcontracted in that provides that. Maybe if you provide certain data to Cool Milk, that seems to be quite a variable one. Some people just give numbers of pupils, some people give names and year groups. Then you've got safeguarding platforms and behaviour platforms like CPOMs. You've got then information around school trips, whether it's companies that provide coaches, or it might be residential providers that ask for information like dietary requirements or medical conditions in advance. It could be specific risk assessments where you use platforms like Evolve. There could be uniform suppliers if you are involved in taking names and orders for uniforms in school, or that might get outsourced to someone else. Charlie in a moment will talk to you about what's called outside scope, which leads on from this. Photographers that come into school and take images of pupils and staff. Then you've got curriculum tools. There are a vast amount of curriculum tools in primaries and secondaries from different companies. You need to send every curriculum platform a DPA if a member of staff or a pupil signs into it with an individual account. If they just go to a website and they never sign in, they just use it and leave, you don't need a DPA. If they sign in, you do need one. So there's lots of those math ones like Times Table Rockstars, Espresso, Education City, Purple Mash, to build a profile for early years, Lexia's Busy Things, and all of those. There's a lot of them. Junior librarians, if you log lending of books and that names the pupils that they borrowed books for. Class Dojo, even though it's free and you don't get billed for it, there's people names in there very often. So there's a lot of different areas that get covered in the curriculum tools. Then you might have things like websites, because you're in pictures of pupils on there and you might name them. That also then applies for VLEs and email systems, social media, any sync tools that you might use as well. You need to list those. Then coming down to the bottom, if you have ID cards for swiping through doors and key fobs, they will often have names attached to them. Biometrics, if you use them, if not, just put not used in any of these categories. And then you've got document destruction companies. Yes, you might be shredding your paper. If it gets taken away in a van, you're going to need assurance that that's stored securely and then shredded. Same goes for disposal of electronic equipment and erasure of hard drives. Then you've got down the bottom agencies. Some of them might be bought in as buyback from LAs. Others might be individuals. If it's a local authority, whether you are state maintained or academy, you no longer need to send a DPA to them. The ICO are happy that because of their status and that they're government related, that they don't need to be vetted with a DPA, but they do need to be listed here. So that was a change that happened that I reported on in a newsletter recently. You might also then have statutory shares where you've got to report things to local authorities, or the NHS nurses might come in and do heights and weights and leave with data. You wouldn't obstruct the nurse doing that, but you'd want to know where that data was going out to. And then finally down the bottom, you'll have IT infrastructure questions around people like us as IT support companies. We get tickets with staff data on. You might have backup remotely like Redstore. Photocopier companies, because photocopiers have hard drives in them that store data. You need to know where that is, and if it leaves site, is it going to get erased? And a big area is CCTV as well. If you have your telephony over the internet and it's what's called VoIP, you're also going to need to know where all that data is stored as well. So there's an awful lot of companies you need to contact, send those DPAs, and then centralize their responses in here. And as a company, we cannot risk assess the processing of data either in internal assets or external data processors without a complete picture. And that's why this has been so important. Over the 2.5 years that you've been working on this, it was a requirement really from the ICO to get this completed in 18 months. And a lot of our support services were supposed to conclude within 12 months because we were going to work with you to get that done. But we then realised the reality that schools had other pressures upon them. People couldn't get the time to do this. And we have extended up to 2.5 years, but our support for this will end on the 31st of August. So we need this big final push to get those DPAs back in, get this information in here so that we can then risk assess the chances of something going wrong for you as a school and make sure that those risk assessments are recorded. Now, I've spoken an awful lot there, and there's been an awful lot of links back to the Information Asset Register. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen, duck back over to the chat and pick up any questions, but also feel free to unmute your mic and ask if you want to have anything. If you've already had us in to go through and write your risk review, then that's great. You're already where you need to be. If you're one of the schools that hasn't undertaken the risk review yet, then you need to make sure that you get this completed. So questions here, Rebecca. So you've had a DPO audit. Anything else? So in the DPO audit, if you have a DPO service from us, our DPO audit also reviews everything in the data mapping, and we mark things as either complete, in progress, or not started. So if there's anything in the DPO audit that's there as in progress, then it needs to just get completed. If it's all marked as completed, then you don't need to worry. 90% of companies are sending you links to their policies. If they do that and they refuse to send back a DPA, or they don't bother to send back a DPA, you note that down in the progress. So in the event that they cause a data breach on behalf of the school, the ICO will want to see the evidence that the school tried to get the assurance of what was happening with data processing externally. That means they'll expect you to produce an email or some sort of trail that you sent a DPA form and you chased for that DPA form. If you get an email back that says, here's the links to our generic information, note down that that was the response you had, get what you can from it to complete the DPA, the data processing contracts tab. But then if it goes wrong and that third party company drops the ball and it implicates a school, you will be covered as a data controller because you've done everything within your control to try and get the answers. The titles say date. Should this be data? Andrea, is that a particular column on the sheet I was just sharing? If you're able to unmute your mic. Don't be shy, Andrea. I'll try and answer it how I think what you mean. So on the very ends of the columns, if I just reshare the sheet a moment, just very quickly. On the very ends of the columns here, it says DPA sent, DPA received, and DPA progress. So where it says date there, it wants the date that the DPA was sent out by the school. and then either the date that the DPA completed DPA received back or not. So you simply put a date in DPA sent and DPA received. It doesn't mean the data, it means you need a trail of when you sent it out and when you got it back. The data that you got back is going to be detailed in these columns over here, like where they've got your data stored, how they retain it and delete it is in those columns. These columns here are relating to the form and the date you sent the form and the date you got the form back. Or the progress column over here is if you didn't get the form back and you got one of those emails saying we're not going to do it, or here's our generic information link. That's where that data goes. Just going to look at some other questions I've got going on in there. Conversation tab. Scrolling back up. David, I can see you've had a conversation with Charlie. Charlie, I think you've probably answered all the other questions in that question. Okay, Andrea, sorry, I can see you haven't got a microphone. Sorry, I'm asking you to do something you can't do. Hopefully that answers what you needed to know. Charlie, it looks like you've answered everything in there. Has anyone else got any questions that Charlie either hasn't got around to or you want to unmute and ask about? We completely understand that this is the biggest piece of work, and that's why we extended our support for over this 2-year period, because we know it took a while getting these DPAs back. It's just one of those things now where we can't let it go any longer, and the ICO are taking quite serious action against schools that haven't got this in place. Linda, I can see you got your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about pupils who sign in to remote access curriculum stuff, but they always use these, they have a dedicated Gmail address that is on the school's Gmail. They don't use any personal, they don't use any other personal email addresses. Does the same do the same rules apply? Do we still have to get data processing contracts with those companies?
Yeah, so if you've got, let's say, G Suite and the pupils have an individual account in G Suite, by the nature of them accessing it, in the admin center for G Suite will be their forename, their surname, which school they're at, which sex they are probably. So there's a reasonable amount of personal data in there which the school has provided to give them that account. So that's why you still have to try and seek clarification. I will be very upfront with everyone on the call. Microsoft and Google will not respond, and they will just direct you to their information on their websites. In the last newsletter, I wrote quite a lengthy article about G Suite and Google. As of the 21st of March this year, Google pulled all of their data out of the EU, and they now only hold all data in American data centers. There was quite a lengthy article I wrote in there. There's no reason to be unduly concerned at this moment in time, because every school finds themselves in the same situation, but you should be aware that your school data is no longer in the EU and it's been moved over to the US.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
No problem. Any other questions? Okay, I'm going to pass back to Charlie for her to cover what's called outside scope, and that links into this data mapping exercise as well.
Thanks very much, Martin. Okay, so we are nearing the sort of back end of the toolkit. You'll be relieved to know, I'm sure. So outside scope links on to what Martin's just been talking about. Basically, anyone that you don't need to have a signed agreement for, so like the plumber, the landscape gardener, the caretakers that might come in from off-site, school uniform suppliers, taxis, they don't hold any data that you've given them, but they might hold data on something related to the school. We do suggest that you create a list of these individuals. So you can see on our Imaginary Schools templates, we've got that our photographer is actually a member of staff in-house, so there's no need to take any of the images off-site. We do get the question, all they're taking photographs, do they need a DPA? They've not got names or anything. a photograph is still data. So yes, if they are leaving site with your data, then they are going to need a DPA. In our situation, we have them as a member of staff, so we don't need one. School uniforms is a really good example of an outside scope, because we tell all of our parents to go and shop at this particular shop and pick up trousers from M&S, but we don't do the ordering for them. So we say, use the little shop in town, but we're not giving that shop a list of who needs what in what sizes. We are just signposting them over there. Similarly, we have a section down here for agencies. So maybe we outsource to a breakfast club agency. So we've got Get Active in here. We signpost this service every year at the beginning of the year in a newsletter, for example. So we say, if your child wants to come to breakfast club, sign up here, and it takes you through to their website. A good way to differentiate if they need a contract or not, if this breakfast club arrives with a register, they take their register and then they leave with it, they don't need a contract, because we're not giving them any data at all. If they arrive and we hand them a register, then they're going to need a contract. Same with sports clubs, music lessons. If you have like a crafts club, if somebody is coming on site and all you've done is advertise their service at the school, you don't need to worry about having a contract, because you've not given them a list of names or email addresses or phone numbers or dates of birth. They are arriving with all of their own material. It might be the same if you have a telephone or CCTV company. It's always good to list them on there, just because it shows that we are fully aware that they have data relating to us, but we haven't given it over. It might be that another good example actually is things like the free fruit and veg. So you might say, we have 60 children in reception, over 2 classes, we need this much. They provide you with that, but we don't say, well, Timmy would like strawberries, Charlie would like apples, Henry would like oranges. We're not giving them any personal data, we're not giving them any sensitive data, we're just giving them figures. Then you don't need a contract. Cool Milk, I know we've mentioned them a little bit ago. Martin used them as an example, I think, in the DPC, or they were listed on our examples. Cool Milk, if you provide a figure, so you say we need 26 bottles of regular milk and 3 bottles of oat milk, in that situation, there isn't a need for a contract, because we're just giving them figures. If we said, okay, these 27 children need regular milk, but Charlie, Henry and Timmy need coconut milk or oat milk or whatever, in that situation, because we're giving over that data, we don't actually need to give them any contracts to sign if they're not having that data. If you're giving it to them, please do get them to sign something, even if it's just a first name to write on a lunchbox or on a packed meal or a bottle of milk. It is still data, it is still linked to the school, it is still important that we have a contract in place. Okay, I can see that we've got a message in the chat, so I will tackle that one. So if you hand them a register when they arrive on site and they return it before they leave, are we still required for outside scope or DPA? Okay, so if they are taking the register with them, we would suggest having a DPA. If they are arriving and using it on site, it's, I mean, Martin, how would you feel about that one? It's an interesting call.
Is in my mind, it's a non-negotiable. They sign a DPA. I've already experienced this. I've had parent helpers in all innocence, and also third-party contracted organisations who've taken a picture or a scan from their phone and taken it with them because they needed to do some follow-up afterwards, or they couldn't remember the names of the children, and when they handed the sheet back, they didn't have it to reference. So because of instances like that, you need a DPA.
I think, yeah, the best rule of thumb is better safe than sorry. We have had some data breaches, some very serious ones from third-party providers. One particular one, there was an IT company that rebuilt some computers and there was a secondary data breach off the back of that. Because there was no contract, the ICO was very, very interested in why they hadn't sought out to check that this company was compliant. If you're in doubt, get them to sign it, I would say, just because It's better safe than sorry. It keeps us out of their issues. If there is a data breach, it stops us getting tangled up legally with them. And I think it's a nice little reminder that you do expect them to be sensible with the data they've got. 9 times out of 10, of course, they're going to be sensible. They're all DBS checked. They're working in schools. But people make mistakes. Mistakes do happen. I think that's a big thing with GDPR, is you have to be understanding breaches will happen. But if we can cover our backs, then that is what's best for everybody. Martin, are you happy for me to move on to, I can do school level risks if you like?
Yeah, I think this one here. So just to clarify for everyone, Charlie, would you flick onto it? It seems you got your screen share at the moment.
Where is it? There we go.
There we go. So depending on which service you purchase from us, you either will or won't have this tab. If you purchased health check service from us, you won't see the next 2 tabs because they weren't included in the version of the toolkit you've got. We will risk assess the same areas against the information asset register, and there will be additional tabs on the information asset register for health check customers. If you purchase the Readiness service from us, then you will have these tabs because the Readiness service had additional areas included in it. It cost more to purchase at the beginning, and it has more consultancy time attached to it for a deeper risk assessment at the end. So you will have this tab if you've got the Readiness service from us. You will not have this tab if you purchase the health check service from us. Charlie, I'll let you go through it. That's absolutely fine.
Yeah, brill. Okay, so this one looks like a mini audit because effectively that's what it is. It's a really nice little tool that we suggest you guys use, and we can assist you with it on a walk around on a Dpia audit or something like that. But it is a really nice way of looking at the minutiae of data in school. So a lot of this is sort of big picture. It's assets as a whole. Whereas if you look on here, you can see that we've got things broken down into mobile devices, laptops, iPads, mobile phones, USBs, and external hard drives. We've got the mention of data on walls, in trays, desks, pigeonholes, what's in filing cabinets, what's held in emails. So this is looking at sort of the day-to-day practices of what your staff and yourselves get on with. It's a really nice way of keeping on track with making little changes to make yourself more compliant as a school. So you might find that the data held on walls is low risk because you've got the consent, you're only using first names, you update it yearly because you love to do your lovely like colourful display boards and what's been happening over this, that and the other. Pictures of the Christmas play then get changed to what's happened at the summer assembly. It's really, really easy to keep on top of, and it keeps it low risk because we know that the data and the risk of a breach is very, very low. It's a really helpful tool because you can flag it as medium, low or high risk as you go through. So if you think that actually data held at home on personal devices, so maybe a member of staff hasn't got a school issued laptop but has got a personal laptop, and you know they're logging in and they're doing their work, especially at home at the moment. Obviously, given the situation, not all of our staff are in school, so they might be doing a little bit of work at home. If it's not written into your acceptable use policy that you're not to download any data or you're not to store anything or use personal devices, obviously the risk is inherently higher, especially if that asset, that laptop, that iPad is used as a family device as well. It increases the risk of a breach just because people might accidentally stumble across. We did have a data breach where I think it was a head teacher, wasn't it, Martin, whose 2-year-old managed to forward a confidential email onto several other schools while playing with their iPhone. It happens.
It was indeed.
I thought it was. It does happen, but we need to know the risk associated and the risk of a breach and the potential impact. So that's this little coloured column here. When you come across to proposed mitigation, this is just an area for you to have a discussion as a school. How realistic is it that we can make a change to the processing of this data on these assets, and how, what can we do to improve our practices? So let's say you are using USBs and external drives, as mentioned in this top one here. You might say, okay, well, by March 2021, we want everybody to be using OneDrive, SharePoint, cloud services through Gmail. that is a proposed mitigation. It should be logged and it should be evidenced because it shows a really nice continuation of GDPR. We know a lot of GDPR is caught up in the finance side of things. You can't just replace a service that has a fee attached to it. You can't go and buy new locks for every cabinet because we have budgets. You have to be realistic, and this is a fantastic way of evidencing that you know there might be gaps, but you are working towards finding an answer and a solution. It's also really helpful for governors when they come in. A lot of them like to use this template when they do their walkarounds. We have used them on walkarounds as well when we do your Dpia audit. If you would like us to have a walk around and have a look at site, we are more than happy to do so. And if you want to go through and show us it's effectively a development plan. If you show us this and you want some feedback and some solutions, then we can do that. Obviously, we have around 400 schools that we do this with. So if you have a problem, we most likely have a solution, or we can work together to think of one. You can see here, we've broken it down into the principles of GDPR as well. So minimization, limitations, storage, and like the purpose and processing, integrity and confidentiality. And as you go through, it explains why these are areas we need to be thinking about as a school. It's really important as well at the moment to think about home working. So unfortunately, the situation we found ourselves in with COVID, everybody at some point has had to work from home. It's crucial that you have the conversation with your staff and that they understand that they have got a responsibility, even though they're not working in school, that they still have to follow the rules that the school sets. So do think about like updating your acceptable use policy, reminding them all not to download things onto personal users, delete them properly. This is all included in this review. Things like antivirus, I am really, really guilty, and Martin might want to cover his ears. On all my personal devices, I ignore my upgrades. So on my phone, my iPad, and my laptop, when it says, oh, do you want to postpone for 2 hours while we upgrade you? I will push that back as far as I possibly can and then wonder why my laptop's not working properly. In that situation, there is a reason we're asking you to do it. So maybe make it absolutely mandatory that if they are using a personal device, that they are doing their upgrades, because it doesn't just benefit you guys as a school, it's a huge personal benefit to them. I am much better than I was, I have to admit. So as you go further down, we've got things like document retention, you've got insecure means of sharing data, so not encrypting things. Encryption is massively important. We do mention it every time we see you guys, so I won't bore you to death on it, but do really think about encryption. Have that conversation with your IT support, with us as a GDPR unit, and talk to your staff about it as well. We've got inadequate storage, mobile devices, weak passwords. So my favourite anecdote of this one, again, was my bad practice way before I did this. So when I was in insurance, I was forced to change my password every 30 days. For me, I am terrible at remembering anything. So I had a little bit of a rhythm, and if you know me, I have a kitten and it's all I talk about. He's my absolute favorite thing in the world. My password then became kitten 1, kitten 2, kitten 3, so it was really, really easy. If you wanted to get into my system, my password was pretty easy to guess. So do remind staff not to use things like children's names, dates of birth, that kind of thing. We use the phrase long and strong, so a nice long password for longer. Use characters, use 3s instead of E's, get creative with it. It helps reduce the risk massively. So do have that conversation, especially given that they're working from home at the moment. We've got engagement, subject access requests, photocopying, insurance, PTA and governors, audio recordings. So it's all listed there. Make sure you guys have a little look through this if you have this tab. If you want the template in the governors form, that is something we are looking to develop over the summer holidays. So we will upload that to the portal once we've had a chance to get round to it for you. Do have the conversation with us as well if you're not sure how to improve these practices. Like I said, we've probably come across it several times before and have some suggestions for you. So I'll take some questions on this one. I see there is something in the chat. I think Martin's beat me to it. Yeah, Martin's addressed that one. So are there any other questions relating to this particular tab before we move on? No? Fantastic. Martin, do you want me to take the next one? Seeing as you've done the 2 big ones.
That's fine. I don't mind. Let me just scroll across on my spreadsheet before I reshare. the next ones are quite straightforward. You'll all be glad to know. I'm just going to reshare my screen. And we are getting towards the end of this big spreadsheet as well, I promise you all. I appreciate it's been a while on here. The next tab then, moving along from what Charlie's just presented, is PECA. So PECA stands for Privacy and Electronic Communication Regulations. It was included in GDPR originally. It then was decided by the ICO that it needed to become a piece of legislation individually on its own. And PECA is meant to cover adults from getting spammed with publications or marketing that they don't wish to receive, either through email or companies that just bombard them. It's a really unfortunate situation that schools are also lumped into that category. I know when I've visited many of you, you sound aghast when I say that things like school newsletter is classified as a publication under GDPR. And if you do distribute that electronically, then it is covered by PECA, and you have to ask parents for consent if they wish to receive that newsletter electronically. If you send it in paper form, PECA doesn't apply. So it can go in a book bag, that's absolutely fine. But if you send it through any sort of electronic means and you send the original file with that communication, then you need to have their consent. The same would go for third-party marketing. If you're including third-party marketing for local companies or maybe after school clubs, all of that constitutes marketing. And if that's in the newsletter, you also need parental consent for marketing. So that should go on as an additional marketing item for you. You then should, on this tab, list all of the communications or marketing that you might distribute as a school, and we've given you some examples there. And then you say, well, who are the recipient groups? And there's a drop-down box, or no, there isn't. There's a type-in box there for you. And then this is a drop-down box here to say what format they go out in, whether it's dual or single format. And then also on the end, whether you've got consent for it or whether it's just a legitimate interest of the school. Unfortunately, it's not a legitimate interest to send the newsletter, as I've said, so it would be a consent item. Then you might need to adjust your consents to account for that, because parent consent for these things should be kept. And then when you start to distribute, if you're doing it electronically, you have to respect the wishes of those parents. Some schools have just pretended that this doesn't exist, and it's come back to haunt them, because when you come across a parent who understands their rights under GDPR, they end up communicating with the school and saying, why am I being sent marketing for this, that and the other? And we've had a few parents that have made direct complaints to the ICO about the school because they haven't sought consent, and they haven't either respected that consent if they've had it or they've ignored it. So you need to seek that consent, record it and follow it. However much of a pain that is, you need to do it. And I know it's just another thing to keep track of. It might be easy to set up a distribution list on things like parent mail for parents that have consented and then exclude parents that have not consented. But it's just a way to make sure that they get the correct materials. If it's things around the education of their child, maybe it's a parent mail about invitation to parents' evening, they can't refuse that. That is a legitimate interest under the school. If it's something about welfare and you want them to see a nurse, or there's an offer to see a school nurse, an NHS nurse coming in, you can send a message about that. You don't need consent for that. It's where it's the additional things that are nice if situations, and unfortunately the newsletter is included in that, although I appreciate it's a key communication line. You need to have this additional consent under PECA. Any questions on that one? I will just check the line and aside on conversations. Does this include Google Docs to obtain permission? So if you are sending, for instance, a Google form to collect permissions or consent, then no, you can send that because you're using that as a vehicle to seek consent for them. That's okay. Is it okay to renew consents at key stage changes rather than every year? Yeah, you're absolutely right there, Rebecca. You can do it at key stage change, early as into key stage 1 into key stage 2. It used to be every year when the legislation started out, and then the ICO actually saw some sense that for schools that was an idiotic decision, and it made it an administrative nightmare to try and get consent every single year, and you would always have a raft of people that never responded anyway. So do it every key stage change rather than every year. It makes it more manageable for you as a school, but you've always got something that's relevant there. Does this include parent mail communication and school updates? Again, it depends on the content of those parent mail communications. If it's not directly related to the education of their child or their pastoral care, then it probably falls under PECA. If it does relate to education and pastoral care, then you don't need consent. You have to make a judgment call on what's in the content of those parent mails. To avoid the newsletter, can you send an email saying, look at our website? Yes, you can. That was one of the things I was going to come on to. You can direct them to somewhere where it's hosted. If they choose to go visit that destination, then you don't need consent for that. You can direct them to it without falling foul of consent, as long as that document's not attached. There's a big few there from Claire. Any other questions around PECA? Okay, Charlie, I'll pass back to you to go on to the next tab.
Let me just reshare with you guys. Okay, so the next one is the DPIA. So that is the Data Privacy Impact Assessments. So I've also done a webinar on this one. It is available on the portal, so it won't take too long, but it is crucial to highlight how important this is. So GDPR obviously is not retrospective. We've mentioned that before, but we do require all of our current providers to provide us with the security in knowing that they are GDPR compliant. And that's how we get them through the DPAs, the data processor agreement. They're all very similar, so it's going to get a bit confusing. The DPIAs are what we use moving forward. So if you were to change from Capita to Integris, for example, we would expect to see you guys running a data privacy impact assessment. It's basically a risk assessment, but for data. So it would go through how you're going to move the data from SIMS onto Integris. How are you going to ensure that the data you move across is looked after in that period of transition? How do we know for certain that the company is going to look after it and not save a backup or, you know, sell it on to a third-party processor? It's even for things like changing curriculum providers. So if you went from MyMath to SumDog, we'd expect to see this. If you went from CPOMs to Behaviour Watch, it's just a risk assessment to ensure that companies you take on are GDPR compliant. We need a log because obviously if anything was to go wrong, so let's say if we were moving from SIMS to Integris, if that data was lost in the transition process, there needs to be a log of changes. The ICO would expect to see that, but there's also a form that we can provide you with when you come up to do one of these that has been compiled that covers absolutely everything. You've got to go through a step-by-step process to make sure that you have covered everything possible, every possible scenario to avoid a data breach, to avoid the loss or deletion of data, and to ensure that the company you're using is GDPR compliant. So it is a big piece of work depending on the type of move that you're looking to do. But we have found that schools that have done it, let's say they were choosing between CPOMs and Behaviour Watch, the filling of this out has actually made it perfectly clear which one they should follow because the practices are perhaps a little bit tighter with one rather than the other. It's a really, really useful document. It is completely essential moving forward to do these reports. Once you've done one or two, they become second nature. It is honestly like buying new gym equipment. You have to do a risk assessment. Changing the floors in the canteen, you have to do a risk assessment. It will become second nature. It is just maybe a little bit of a challenge the first time around, but we have helped schools with these. We have helped schools compile them. It is absolutely crucial that you guys get your head around these. Again, like I said, there is a PowerPoint of me talking over the top of it. It's uploaded as a video onto our portal, so those of you that have access, definitely give it a watch when you come up against one of these and you come up against a large scale data move. But otherwise, you can pick up the phone and speak to one of us. We are more than familiar and more than happy to help you out for the first few. It also does apply to the physical moving of data as well. So let's say the front office is being relocated off to the side. You've had a little extension built. That's the dream, isn't it, really? A bigger office. In that situation, we would expect to see you guys writing down, cataloguing the move. Where is the data going to be held whilst the extension is being finished? Can we lock it away in a classroom to make sure it's not just left out for everyone to have a little rifle through the drawers? It's all that common sense stuff that you do already and you already think about because GDPR isn't reinventing the wheel. You've been protecting data and your students through safeguarding since day one. Since the day you started your job, you've known that you've got to protect certain aspects. This is just the evidence that you know what you're doing and that you're making it abundantly clear and you're covering your back. So if anything did come up, you know for certain that you're actually going to be on the money with the moving, with the new process, and you know that the new provider is also playing by the rules, because obviously the worst case scenario, as we talked about with the DPAs, is a data breach on a third party half and they've let you down, but there's no evidence to show that you've at least attempted to be compliant. So this is that step, but moving forward rather than retrospective. So are there any questions on this one at all?
Charlie, just before you take the questions, one of the things that comes up here frequently is why a DPA versus a DPIA. So the data processing agreement is to be sent to those third-party organisations that are processing data on the school's behalf while you were trying to complete the data mapping. During that period, the DPA is the responsibility of the third party to complete. Once you have all of your data mapping in place, which you will do by the end of August, you will then have to start using DPIAs and stop using DPAs. They're no longer relevant. The DPIA is the responsibility of the school or the individual who wishes to make the change in the school to complete. It is a bit more involved than the DPA, but you have to do them. There is no way around it. As Charlie said, if something goes wrong and you are found not to have completed it and taken steps to go through that process, the repercussions with the ICO can be quite serious. If it's a situation where even after assessing a potential company, let's say they're the only company with a particular platform or service, and it's absolutely core to the running of the school that you use them, we may have to still flag GDPR practices as high risk because maybe their data storage is questionable. But because of the impact on the school, if the school didn't proceed with using it, you do have to go ahead with it. So that you need to make sure these DPIAs are thorough, and that this log here is then backed up with a folder full of the DPIA documents themselves. Sorry, Charlie, go for the questions.
Perfect, lovely. Okay, let's have a look, see what we've got crop up. To avoid newsletter. So it looks like we haven't had any questions on this one. Obviously, like we said, if something does come up, please do email us at the end or catch us at the end. We have got a video available. Responsibility of GDPR in the school appears to have escalated. It sounds like a lot more work. Also, on a lot more shoulder. So the level of work with GDPR hasn't actually changed. It's just that we're now putting in this deadline that should have been completed back in December 19. It is a lot of work. It's always been a lot of work. We're not under any illusion that this is an easy task to do. We understand that, you know, for one person to tackle it is very, very difficult. We appreciate that not everybody has an abundance of time to do this, but the excuse of we've not had time after 2.5 years really isn't going to fly anymore. The ICO isn't looking to be lenient anymore. 2.5 years is a long time. We've had schools that, you know, have come on and completed it in a week. It is possible. We know it's hard work. We know that not every school has staff that they can apply to it. We know that not everybody has the time because they have maybe 2-3 job roles, or, you know, they're sort of temping for someone. We do appreciate it is a considerable amount of work, but you do have to be appreciative that you have had 2.5 years. I know, like, so I came from insurance. I know that we had to be ready as of May in 2018. Moving forward, the amount of work still hasn't changed much. It's just making sure that what you've done in the past stays up to date. The big chunk of work has been this last 2.5 years. Moving forward, it is just about maintaining and monitoring. So yes, I mean, there is training, but we suggest merging that with safeguarding so it doesn't become this completely foreign concept. It is going to be part of your everyday, in the same way that risk assessments are part of your everyday, safeguarding, health and safety. It is going to fall into the background. It will become second nature. Moving forward, obviously with us as DPO, we will support you as much as you need us to. That is absolutely, you know, our prerogative as your DPO. We need to make sure that our schools are supported. So if you do think that you are struggling or you feel that you're snowed under with it, have the discussion and we will look to support you, give you as much support as you need. We'll have lots of new documents coming out every year. We'll be reviewing all of our policies. So we do aim to make it as easy on you guys as possible, because we know it is a big chunk of work to start with, and moving forward, we want to make sure you guys are absolutely comfortable and well situated to tackle it. So actually, thank you. That's a really, really good point, Rebecca. Thank you.
Any other questions relating to DPIAs? It's something that when you come to them, more questions arise once you get into the form. I will add as well, we've got a DPIA template, just like we've got a DPA template. You're entitled to that regardless of whichever service you have from us. So just let us know when you get to needing to do that DPIA and we'll send you the template over. It's also available on the portal as well, so you can always get it on your own time too. Yeah,
thank you very much, Claire. You have pointed out it is 105. So if you're looking for the document, it's document GDPR 105 and it's titled DPIA if you need it.
Charlie, would you like me to take over for the next bits?
Yes, that would be really lovely. I have got another meeting, so I'll leave it with Martin if that's all right. And then I'll hopefully jump back on at the end. But if not, you guys know how to reach me personally as well. But yeah, thank you very much, Martin. And thank you for everyone for attending.
Okay, not a problem. Thank you, Charlie. Okay, everyone, last few tabs and they're quite lightweight. The next one may be one that you don't need to do, but you do need to get certain bits of information in it. So if you have a separate asset register or a piece of asset software, then you don't have to necessarily use our tab that's set out here. But there are two key bits of information that you need. So you need to know for cybersecurity and GDPR, the devices that you have in school that will have data potentially stored on them of a personal or sensitive nature. That includes laptops, desktop computers, tablet devices, school-owned mobile phones. So you only need to list mobile phones if you have one that's owned by the school. School-owned USB sticks or external hard drives, not those that are owned by staff. Any cloud platforms that you buy into, and most schools now have got Office 365 and things like OneDrive or Google in G Drive, and then photocopiers and also your wireless system. Those areas need to get listed on your asset register. If you've got a separate one, don't reinvent the wheel and waste loads of times, but on that other asset register, you will need to add certain extra columns. So we need to know for Windows devices the date that the hard drive was encrypted in mobile devices like laptops. That's because they could be lost, mislaid, staff might get them stolen out of a car, and they could have data on them locally. That means that you've got a data breach and we need to report it. If the hard drive's encrypted, that data breach is a low risk because the data could not be accessed. There is no requirement to have desktop computers encrypted, but it's our recommendation from bitter experience that we've had schools that have experienced break-ins and things like the Senko computer or the business manager's computer or the head's computer have been taken, and then it's a data breach because there was data on those computers that was stored locally. If the hard drives had been encrypted, that would have been a low-risk data breach and wouldn't have been so much of a concern. So to be clear, the ICO and the NCSC, the National Cybersecurity Centre, don't require desktop computers to be encrypted, but it's a recommendation from us as a company to avoid any unfortunate situations. That does need to be logged, the date that you encrypted the hard drive and those devices. So if you add that onto your existing asset register, that is fine. Just make a note on here you're using your other asset register and we can link across to it, or put it into here if it's easier and you haven't got an asset register or you haven't got a system separately. Tablet devices all need to have a PIN code. So pupil tablet devices can have the same PIN code for ease of using them in the classroom. Staff tablet devices have to have a separate PIN code, and that needs to be 4 digits or more. If you've got tablet devices that have fingerprint authentication or face recognition, that's fine. You can use that instead of a physical PIN code with digits. School mobile phones should also have a PIN code. It might be that the head's got one or a caretaker's got one. That just protects the numbers of anyone that's in the address book, or if it's a more modern handset, it might have pictures if it can take pictures and it's got a camera. There shouldn't be, moving forwards, USB sticks and external hard drives used in the schools. Those should be phased out entirely and should move to things like cloud storage or keeping things on the server. If you do, they need to be encrypted. So again, you need to know date it was stored, who's got them, when it was encrypted, and to have assurance that if it's lost, it's got a lower chance of someone accessing the data that's on it. Cloud platforms, people should have accounts with passwords, so we just need to know that that's in place. Photocopiers, However, as I said earlier, there's a hard drive in your photocopier. It records all scans. So you need something in the lease that says at the end of the lease that either the hard drive is erased and you get a GDPR certificate of erasure, or that you get that hard drive returned to you. And then the wireless system, it's things like managing access to the wireless, which then other devices are attached to that wireless system in school. How a password's given out to visitors and so forth. Does that need to be tightened up? Do you have a guest network that you could use and so forth? So all that information goes into the IT hardware tab. Linked to that, before I do questions, you also need to list all of the shared drives, be it server shared drives or cloud shared drives, that are listed on your computer. So when you go to My Computer, you might see that you've got A for admin drive or T for teacher shared. So it's just in the event of a data breach or a subject access request, we can start to drill down and we know who maybe had access to a particular drive where the data was lost from. And it just helps with inquiries. It speeds it up and reduces time wasted. But also the ICO may ask which groups of staff in school. That's around cybersecurity and IT. I'm just going to so portal login details. If you haven't got a portal login and you've got to turn it on as a technical support company, if you just raise a support ticket for your normal technical consultant, they can reactivate your portal account and it will email you a login so you can get into there. So if you don't have that, just raise a support ticket. If you aren't turn on technical support, just in that same portal where you can't get access, you don't need to be logged in, but the portal for your school allows you to raise a technical support ticket. If you can't get to that, email support@turniton.co.uk and say that you'd like an account, and somebody on the support team will pick it up. So again, that is support@turniton.co.uk. If it's GDPR related, you can email GDPR team directly on gdpr@turniton.co.uk. I haven't got any more questions in the chat. Has anybody got anything they want to unmute and ask on this? No. Okay. I'll pop back over to the spreadsheet. So the last tab is your compliance action plan. If you've had some of the more recent updates, the compliance action plan got a massive overhaul, but now it lists all the areas of GDPR that we're going to be checking that relate to processes, policies, procedures, data mapping, and then we assess whether it's been started, completed, or it's in progress. You get a percentage complete. That tallies up with your DPO audit as well. So if you complete a DPO audit, we also then embellish this further and you have a more detailed version of your compliance action plan. But if you're thinking, what do I do next? What steps do I take? The compliance action plan, last time we looked at your toolkit, we update it. If you complete something in between, so let's say we went down here and on the data held tab, all of a sudden you now do have all of the assets collected by the data fields collected per data subject checked. You can move that from not started yourself because you'll have access to this online to complete. And then that indicates to us next time we look at it, you've moved forward, but it increases your percentage complete at the bottom so that it tallies with you making progress with GDPR readiness. So the compliance action plan we dip into when we have communication with you, but also it's there for you to indicate progress you've made as you've gone through. And under the notes section, you can make notes of anything you've done, or if you've got a question for us next time you speak with us, pop it in there because we can see it too. That's another reason why we say to host this online in SharePoint, because any upgrades can be done automatically. And also, if you've got a question, the most recent version is available to us just like it's available to you. So it's all there in the cloud. And should we also need to get anything across to the ICO, we don't have to pester you. We can just look inside there and find answers if we're talking with the ICO on your behalf and you're aware maybe we're dealing with a data breach or something. Any questions surrounding compliance action plan? Not over on the chat on the side. Anybody want to unmute and ask anything? Okay. Well, that is all of the areas that we were going to cover in the GDPR toolkit spreadsheet. The toolkit spreadsheet covers quite a few areas of GDPR, but mainly the data mapping requirement. You can see that there's an awful lot there that relates to data mapping, but there are other areas like the cybersecurity we just looked at. There's also things like the SAR logs and the data breach logs. Charlie said it, and I'll echo it. the hard work is into getting it done and set up. It's a bit like the health and safety process when it came in. Getting those audit files created that you were going to get inspected were a nightmare in the beginning, but once it's set up, it should be lighter touch to keep it up to date moving forwards, and you haven't got to have this monumentous input of effort on top of your existing role to get it created anymore. It is just maintaining it and making sure it's relevant as you move forwards. I'm happy to answer any other questions if anyone wants to unmute or put anything in the chat on the side. But otherwise, I appreciate this has been a very long meeting, and I know you've probably got other responsibilities, so I will let you go otherwise. So Claire, you've asked a question on the spreadsheet. If you copy and paste something and then you can't delete it, it says password protected. So you will find on the information asset register and the data processing contracts tab, I'm the person responsible for this spreadsheet if you hate it, so you can hate me. I've stopped you deleting rows because on the risk assessment formulas, there's formulas that link across to other spreadsheets, and if you don't delete the rows in a certain way, it means that they really mess up the risk assessment process. So if you've got an asset that's not required, literally blank that row so that you have got pink cells, but under the asset name, can you just write asset not used to delete or something like that, or please delete this, and then when we come to do your risk assessment, we'll take that row out so it disappears altogether. Anything in a cell? Okay, so are you trying to copy and paste a cell across? Are you trying to copy from one cell and paste it into the others? If you can't copy and paste the cell itself, double click on the text inside of one cell, highlight it, copy it, double click on the next one and paste in. It shouldn't prevent you copying and pasting between cells because I've enabled formatting. If you're not shared in the cloud, how do you send the toolkit? So you need to email the toolkit back into us, and then we will host it on our SharePoint and send you a share link. So you can either edit it as a tab in the web browser, or you can open it up from the desktop software on your computer if you want to do it on there. Claire, that's fine. Contact us. We'll happily talk through things with you. Charlie and I are on the help desk today, so after this call, we'll be available to speak with you. If we have an issue dropping in another spreadsheet, IT hardware lesson to the spreadsheet, can we solve this? So you can keep the other spreadsheets separately if you want. So on the IT asset register tab, you can just literally write at the top there, blank everything out and just put, we keep our assets in a separate spreadsheet. It will be made available and leave it at that. GDPR 105 Dpia is a blank Word document in the portal. Okay, Tara, I will check that and see what's going on with that. It shouldn't be entirely blank. It should have quite a lot of text and tables on it. Just in case it is a broadband issue, it's worth downloading it and opening up locally just to check. I have had that before when someone's viewed one online. It has displayed blank, but once downloaded, it did have stuff in it. Yeah, no, to start on the DPAs, I agree with you, David. There was a few DPAs to get through. Anyone else have any questions? I'm more than happy to try and answer them for you. Nope. Okay. Still blank when you download it. Okay, Claire, I'll make a note. We need to replace that one in the portal. That's not a problem. Let me see if I can drop the real DPIA into this chat, so at least you can get a copy immediately. There we go. So if I drop that into the chat, the DPIA is just uploading my end, so I will send it across in this chat so you can get a copy. Right, let's see if that goes across. There you go, DPIA template should be there in the chat. If you take the copy out of the chat, it should be there with all the formatting, because that's the one I've been using with other schools. And we'll look at the one in the portal to make sure that that gets replaced. Any other questions at all? Okay. I'll let you all go after nearly 2.5 hours. You're probably in need of a break and a cup of tea or coffee and a stretch of your legs. But We're available on the help desk as well. So if you've got any questions, you can ring the help desk number. You can email us on gdpr@turniton.co.uk. If we get a high level of calls, sometimes the line's engaged because there is only one line coming in, but do keep trying. We will call you back. We've also got a log to see if you've tried to call. So we do look at who's called and who we've missed, and we'll try and come back to you too. Thank you everyone for coming along. I really do appreciate your time and all sincerity. I know this is a big task. We are around up to the end of term. I know you may not be working in a holiday, but if you are working in a holiday and you do need support, we are working throughout the holiday as well if you've got any questions or need support on anything. Thank you everyone. I'll remain here with my mic muted and my camera off, but until you've all dropped out of the meeting, but I'm here if you want to ask anything that's individual to you as well. Thank you everyone.